Hello and welcome to Afternoon Tea with Docs. I'm Dr. Linda, emergency and board certified lifestyle medicine doctor tuning in here from Sheffield. And I'm here with my amazing friend and colleague, Petya Popova, who is a lead diabetic dietitian from Coventry. It's so lovely to see so many of you joining us today. And for those who haven't joined us before, I have a question for you. Have you ever considered that different health conditions, such as type 2 diabetes, heart disease, fatty liver disease, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and even some cancers, such as bowel and breast cancer, are driven by the same underlying lifestyle practices? Well, the answer is a unifying yes. And so they are preventable, and with the right lifestyle changes, even reversible. And this is why we're here every Sunday at 5 p.m. UK time, so that we can bring you the evidence-based lifestyle medicine education and group consultations freely accessible, so that you can empower yourself with the lifestyle practices you need to transform your health in a supportive community setting. So why not join us as a free member on afternoonteawithdocs.com to join our health experts and supportive community completely free of charge to start your health journey. You can say hello to us on Instagram, Facebook, and on LinkedIn by searching the handle Afternoon Tea with Docs. Well, all of our events are completely free of charge, and you can support our cause now by clicking on the donation link in the comments below.
Right, so today we're speaking with Jessica Fern. Jessica is a psychotherapist and public speaker and trauma and relationship expert. In her international private practice, Jessica works with individuals, couples, and with people in multi-partner relationship who no longer want to be limited by their reactive patterns, by cultural conditioning, or insecure attachment styles and past traumas. She helps her clients embody new possibilities in life and in love. And also, she has this incredible gift of translating complex relationship theories and distilling them into practical steps to help us build relationships. Welcome, Jessica.
Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us on this Sunday and for bringing your incredible gift to us. When we started reading your gift to humanity, Polysecure, Attachment, Trauma, and Consensual Non-Monogamy, just a year ago, we have been so inspired, both from a personal and also from our clinical life, to bring your knowledge here to Afternoon Tea. So we are very grateful that you are able to join us today.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you all.
When you started the book in the acknowledgements already, you said that you wrote the book Polysecure because you believe in love, and that it is so evident in the way you write from the beginning. Even before we dive into the book, the acknowledgement section shows how deeply you have reflected on your relationships to an extent that most people would not even think it is possible. It is so inspiring to hear the way you talk about each relationship and to see such deep connections, which are evidence that you really practice what you preach. The truth is, I usually don't read the acknowledgement section of the book, but yours was so genuine, refreshing, and heartwarming. And so from the first page till the end, there is something for everyone. Monogamous or polyamorous, you have something to learn about yourself and your community. So we can't wait to dive in and start with the question, how did you get acquainted with polyamory in your private and in your clinical work?
Yeah. And they kind of are two different stories that, interweave. And my next book has a little bit more of that story, but in my private life, I think, I grew up in New York City, in Brooklyn, New York, in adolescence in the early 90s. And so there was sort of a subculture of non-monogamy, even though that word was never spoken. Like that word polyamory and non-monogamy wasn't there, but there just was sort of an expectation that maybe at a party you kissed more than one person, or 3 people kissed and made out together, like that existed. So in some ways I kind of grew up with it. I also had an aunt and uncle that literally were hippies that were at the original Woodstock. And sometimes Aunt Liz like went off for a weekend with someone else. And again, there was no word for it, and it wasn't cheating because Uncle Albert knew about it. So it was just like, it was around, it was around. But, as I sort of was getting to the end of my 30, end of my 20s, coming to 30s, I entered into a monogamous marriage, right? And then it was a few years into that I was reading about non-monogamy, and actually had clients coming to me who were exploring non-monogamy. And I was like, oh, I need to, up my education here. So as I started to read about it, I just found myself, and saw that, oh, my whole history before my monogamous marriage actually had a name. But then I wanted to intentionally actually explore this and open the marriage that I was in. So yeah, and then once I started to just put up the shingle, the literal tab on my website that I did non-monogamous work, it just flooded in because there's just such a need for it, especially however many years ago that was. Yeah.
Amazing. And in your book, you talk a lot about the different path that your professional life took. I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit more about, you mentioned Buddhism, somatic working, a very different career path than most people take.
Yeah.
So if you talk about that and how that perhaps influenced your work now as a psychotherapist.
Yeah, I mean, my personal interests were from early age, was psychology, was then starting to shift into Buddhism psychology, and understanding, the process of undoing and awakening. And so that led to different iterations of my career. But I think it was, I started a grad program in therapy and left, and then went to conflict resolution for my master's degree. And it was in genocide studies. And I did research in Rwanda. And ironically, that brought me back to therapy because I was researching the people who actually rescued during the genocide. So they were people who were told to kill their neighbors, and instead of killing their neighbors, they saved their neighbors. And it's pretty incredible, as simple as it sounds, that when someone's own life was threatened, they were willing to risk it, sometimes even for people they didn't know. Why would we do that, right? So as I interviewed those people and explored why they would do that, and as I interviewed people who killed during the genocide and why they chose to kill, right, there were these themes. And all of the people who chose to risk their lives and become rescuers had parents, grandparents, aunt and uncles. They had role models in their life that gave them this secure attachment and modeled sort of altruistic behavior. It was incredible. And then when I would interview all of the young men at that time that did participate in killing, who weren't militia, right? They were just sort of civilians that were killing. They were really taken over by fear, and they really believed the propaganda and the narrative. So there was almost this immunity that certain people had to the propaganda narrative when they had experiences and role models that showed them how to be loving towards others. So there was something in that I said, oh, wow, here I am doing this more global genocide work. And actually, it's like working at the individual level to heal our attachment wounds and to work through issues around love and fear. Yeah. So it brought me back to the therapy room.
Amazing. And it is incredible to hear that even in such a different situation, because most of us hopefully would not experience genocide, but the underlying patterns are the same. It's again about decision made out of love or decisions made out of fear.
Yeah.
How that's incredible. Okay, so let's dive into the book, and the book focuses on different attachment styles and attachment theory, which is one of the psychological theories most supported by scientific studies. Has been tried, tested in different scenarios, and it holds. But even though it's so popular, I'm conscious that some of our listeners might not have heard of attachment theory. So could you give us an overview of what the theory is, what the different styles are, perhaps starting with how they develop in childhood and then how they appear later in life?
Great. And jump in because it might take a few minutes to explain. So, but yeah, it was a British psychologist, John Bowlby, who came up with attachment theory. And then it was his colleague, an American psychologist, Mary Ainsworth, who really, put it into the lab and put it into practice. And so the basic theory and research shows that, as infants, we're born into this world pretty helpless. We need an adult, we need caregivers to care for us immediately, otherwise we'll die, right? So our first survival strategy is actually emotional bonding. And it's not just having our physical needs met for like food and shelter and warmth, it's the emotional, biological needs for attunement and kindness and emotional responsiveness. That we know that when we're scared or upset or uncomfortable because my diaper's wet or I'm hungry, right? I make a noise and someone lovingly responds to me, right? And that loving, warm piece is really important. And so what they found is that when we have caregivers that are emotionally attuned and responsive enough of the time, not all of the time, that's impossible, but enough of the time that we feel like we can rely on them, we feel secure with them. We feel safe in the world with ourselves, with them, right? I feel protected and cared for. And this is huge. This is actually the foundation of then our psychological development into the healthier stages along the way. And so when we feel safe with the people around us and secure with them, then we feel safe to go explore the world and play. Right? And then we look back and see, is our parent there? Okay, they are. I can continue exploring the room, right? And so this doesn't stop in childhood, this extends, right? That our early attachment experiences then become this blueprint of what we expect others to be like, enter in our romantic relationships. Right? So do I expect others to be there for me, or do I expect them to ignore me? Or do I expect that I have to, constantly be pushing them to be there for me, right? So half of the time, so when we have secure attachment, we have good personal boundaries. Usually we can communicate our needs. We allow our needs in the first place, right? Having needs isn't a bad thing. We respect our partner and their needs. And there's this real good balance between being able to be connected and intimate and also being able to be on our own and be okay and feel good within ourselves. Half of the time, that's not what happens in reality. And half of the time, people do not come from those experiences of a secure, functioning childhood. And it's not just because of our parents and blaming them. There's many valid reasons why parents can't show up in the way that they would even prefer. Right? Whether it's cultural reasons, poverty, racism, illness, other people in the household that have special needs, other siblings that have more needs than other children, all of that kind of stuff. So then what happens is there's 3 other insecure attachment styles that can develop. The first is called dismissive or avoidant. So that's usually when there's full-on abandonment. Right? There's no one here to attach to, right? There's neglect, or my parents are definitely around. I might even have all of my needs met, physically and financially. There might be a lot of abundance, but emotionally, there isn't this tuning into the child and tuning into their interior world, right? So whatever reason it is, the child learns, I can't really rely on the people that I'm supposed to rely on. I'm just going to rely on myself. And they wind up minimizing and shutting down their attachment system because it's too painful to have these attachment needs for closeness and connection and attunement, and no one's meeting them. So it's a protective strategy. There's wisdom in it to say, I'm going to shut this down. And we have this self-reliance is what emerges, right? And in adulthood, that dismissive style is usually someone who prides themselves on, on being self-reliant, on not having needs, on maybe not even having certain feelings they don't like when others around them really have needs and feelings. Distance, they tend to be labeled as the island or the lone wolf, like that kind of archetype, right? And when there's too much conflict or intensity, they're going to withdraw. So the words that the literature gives it are avoidant and dismissive, but I like to think of it as this withdrawing, this pulling away style. I think that has a little bit of a less negative connotation, right? Then there's the other end of the spectrum. Instead of withdrawing from connection and attachment, there's people who experience, usually in childhood, there was the presence of love, but it wasn't dependable or it was unpredictable for whatever reason. So there's a parent that's there sometimes and then not there sometimes, right? Or sometimes for this thing, they're going to punish me. And then this other time I do the same thing and they praise me, right? Or as one of my clients was saying to me just yesterday, she's like, I was one of 7 kids and my mom genuinely loved me. I know that, but she couldn't give me the attention I needed because there was just too many kids, right? So she got this inconsistency. So when that happens, this preoccupation, right, of focusing on the other, or when there's usually even histories of like alcoholism or drug abuse, and you don't know if your parent is going to, are they dangerous or are they safe right now? So there's this hyper focus outward on what are they doing? Are they okay? Or am I okay? And there's this real activation. The attachment system gets overactive instead of underactive. In adulthood, it's preoccupation with your partner, with love, with romance, to try to validate your okayness, right? So there's often this loss of self at the expense, like the fusion of partner at the expense of self. And then the third style is called disorganized or fearful withdrawn. And that's when there's been more extreme abuse. And that can also happen in adulthood, but in childhood, it's typically, more extreme physical, emotional abuse, neglect, traumas that have happened. But the archetype of this experience would be the person who's supposed to care for me and help me feel better and safe and comfortable is the one that I'm afraid of. They're the one that's scaring me. So you have this paradoxical situation where the one that I'm supposed to seek comfort from, my attachment system is activated, is also activating the fight, flight, sympathetic response, right? So it's this one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake. Unfortunately, this style gets really pathologized in the literature, as having certain substance abuse issues, personality disorders, harmful behaviors to others, to self-harming, toxicity. What I talk about in my book, though, is increasingly I see people who really identify with this style, but they're just not acting out in these really harmful ways. But, they have a longing to be close, but there's a lot of fear of closeness is actually quite threatening and dangerous. And so it's more of this internal foot on the gas, foot on the brake experience. Yeah, so that's a broad overview.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I just want to bring our listeners' attention to your book again, because when we talk about attachments, it's described in a maybe sometimes complicated way in our textbooks, and you translate it with such ease and simplicity. And not only that, the next page where you actually put the attachment style into statements that someone with a dismissive or other attachments would actually say about themselves or their partner. I think that's just genius. Yeah. Anybody who wants to understand attachments and their textbooks weren't useful until now, I mean, Jessica, you just translated to everyone what it means. So guys, you definitely have to get this book to understand it better. We had a comment here in the chat who asked a little bit more about avoidance, because it seems like the avoidant attachment seems to be a bit more misunderstood. Is that something that you find in your practice as well?
Yeah, I think people, well, and nowadays there's such an increased awareness around narcissism. And whenever we have an increased awareness around a true phenomenon, it also gets misused and diluted. Right now, people throw that word around as people are narcissistic, and it's like, that's not a narcissistic personality person, right? So, but unfortunately, that avoidant dismissive gets sort of labeled and put into that category, right? What we usually see, though, it's someone who's really focusing on more independence and autonomy over connection and closeness.
Also, they are often misunderstood as being very selfish.
Yeah, Miss Dean is selfish, right? They usually do very well in the workforce, right? They usually focus on their career and things like that. Or yeah, it looks like they're just focusing on themselves. But what happens at a young age when that attachment system shuts down and you don't have people in your life modeling for you healthy connection, healthy communication, working through conflict, right? There's a developmental opportunity that was actually lost. So this person as an adult isn't trying to ignore you or dismiss you or minimize you. They actually need, this is a harder strategy style to work through sometimes, because you have to go through developmental experiences of even feeling your own feelings and then being able to recognize them better in others. Yeah. So often they're just not picking up the cues that are there, and they can learn to, though.
And often the partner translates it as if he or she didn't want to address.
You don't care. Yeah, as if the partner, you don't care about me, or you only care about yourself, or, you're trying to gaslight me. That's another word now that gets thrown around, too loosely. Right. And yes, of course, those things could be happening, but often, someone's not trying to intentionally do those things.
Absolutely. So we just have to be more compassionate and listen and maybe ask more questions to better understand each other. A vital part of healthy relationships are having healthy boundaries, which is something we see many people struggle with because we are never really taught how to set healthy boundaries. Yeah. And people haven't reflected on what their boundaries really like. So could you talk a little bit about the different types of boundaries and how they show up in a relationship?
Yeah. And I would, refer to Alexandra Solomon's work on boundaries, which I do reference in the book. And then Terry Real has fantastic work on boundaries as well, in the intersection of boundaries and our self-esteem, in his book, Fierce Intimacy. And Loving Bravely is Alexandra Solomon's work, right? So I'm kind of building off of them on this, that we can have boundaries that are too open, too porous, right? Or either we're on inserting to others because we don't have great boundaries. Our boundaries are too open, so we're imposing into other and their space and their boundaries. Or we're letting people impose into us, define us, tell us who we are, our opinion. I don't even know my own opinion. I just look to you for your opinion, right? So we can have boundaries that are too open, either outwardly or input wise. And then we can have boundaries that are too rigid and too closed, right? So we're not outputting enough. We're not sharing our opinion. We're not sharing our feelings and our thoughts and our preferences, right? Or we're not letting anything in. We're not letting love in. We're not good or bad. We're just not letting in. Yeah. And so it's sort of the way I think about it is boundaries are this balancing of connection and protection. And so someone with the dismissive avoidance style is focusing usually too much on self-protection at the expense of connection, right? And someone who's in the more preoccupied style is focusing too much on connection at the expense of their own protection, right? And the person who's the disorganized or fearful withdrawn is going to struggle with both ends of that back and forth, right? Oscillating. Yeah, so it's really about learning what do I need to feel safe and protected and also stay connected, right? And that it's a constant dance moment to moment.
It is. That's really well put. I think the biggest takeaway for me when I was reading it is sometimes people talk about boundaries, but what they do is they make demands. They say, oh, this is my boundary and you have to meet it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a demand, it's a wall, it's an ultimatum. So people are, using the word boundaries, and sometimes when we've had no boundaries, there's this phase people go through where it's like, I need to assert myself, which is different than aggressing onto others. And I see people go through this necessary phase of like, staking their boundaries and then it can relax and it should be more of a negotiation. Right.
Yeah. So it could swing the other way, but yeah, I think you put it really nicely in the book that you have to take responsibility for your own role. So you can't just expect other people to meet your needs and respect your boundaries. You have to be assertive, like you said.
Yeah.
And another thing in the book, you've developed this novel kind of nested model of attachment and trauma, which I'd never really thought about the different nested levels before I read the book. So as I said, I love how your brain works and how you always find the underlying pattern and the connections between things. I was just wondering, how did the nested model come about? What inspired you to create it? And you might need to give a bit of background to some of our listeners.
Yeah. Of what it is in the first place. Yeah. So I wish we had the image, right? Maybe, yeah, you can give the image to the screen, Linda. I haven't memorized the pages.
I actually started that page for so long, and of course when we need it.
There we go.
So if you talk about it so that they can see it.
Yeah. So here's the image there, and we have each sphere of like a human experience or realm or level of the nested model is like one within the other, kind of like the Russian dolls, right? So in the center we have self, which is then nested in relationships, which is nested in home, then nested in local community and culture, then societal, and then global. And so typically, historically, attachment is just talked about as the self, like what's your attachment style, right? So your attachment history, and then relationship, how is that impacting your relationships, or how did the relationships you were born into impact you as a self? And what I started to think about was, yes, but we get caught in this loop of self and relationship, and there's other things that impact attachment that could get lost or like reduced to relationship or self, right? So there's a lot of people that at a cultural and societal global level experience racism. And this has a huge impact on their ability to bond, to feel safe, to feel secure in the world and with other people. If we don't have that larger level of racism at those upper levels, it's easy to reduce it as, oh, that's just an untrusting person, right? We wind up pathologizing the individual when it's actually a societal issue, right? So I just wanted to flush out, these other things that do affect our attachment. Because many of us too could say, I had great parents. My parents loved me. I had most of my needs met. Like I didn't have an insecure attachment, but then they went to school, right? And their attachment experience with their peers in adolescence brought a lot of trauma in their life. Or it wasn't until they go into the workforce, right? And they experience certain things. Or they marry someone that's a different culture, from a different culture or religion. And now suddenly attachment gets influenced, So yeah, that was the intention of that.
I thought it brought it to light when you shared the story about one of your patients who actually described her distress and difficulties in life when she was talking about her relationship to the current environmental problems. It was so distressing to her that she wasn't able actually to cope with her own personal relationship, right?
Yeah, exactly. She was experiencing, because of this sort of climate crisis and realities, she was very preoccupied with those and felt very paralyzed in her life. And then it was impacting all these other levels. So what happens at one level can go up or down, impacting the others. and she was feeling insecure and preoccupied with her relationship to the earth itself, and then that was impacting the other areas of her life.
And do you use this in your clinical practice on a regular basis, where you actually define their relationship with their environment, and then they are better understanding their own personal relationship with their loved ones?
Yeah, I haven't been using it in that way. Yeah, I mean, most people are coming with such like acute crisis at the relationship level, right? That it's like we have to put the fires out there first. But, you know, depending on the person, it is something that we will explore, you know, and some people come wanting to explore that. They've read the book and they're like, can we go through the different levels, and can I work on my attachment to that? Which is amazing when I have someone who wants to do that work. Yeah, I've had a course like in the back burner. And if I finally get this course off the ground, like Secure Attachment with Self, it would do what you're saying and explore these levels.
Yes, we can't wait to buy your workbook. I think it will be connected with the book itself so that people can go through it.
Yeah, right. And in the workbook, I have people explore all of this and the questions and the levels. Yes, the workbook should be out hopefully by the end of the year. Sometime this year. Yeah.
There are concepts you talk about in the book, which most people probably haven't heard of, but they are very useful and apply to everyone, monogamous or not. The first one that comes to mind is compersion. I know this is not a concept you came up with, but can you explain to our viewers what this means and how it can enhance our relationships?
Yeah, so compersion is used more specifically to people who are practicing non-monogamy and polyamory. And it means happiness that your partner is going out and having a good time with someone else, right? And they're experiencing joy through another connection, and you genuinely feel lit up and joyful that they are having that experience. But as we were chatting before this started and saying, you know, the word compersion is only a few decades old, but it's really related to me to this Buddhist concept of sympathetic joy, which has existed for thousands of years, which is one of the sort of facets, the four immeasurables, you know, one of the facets of enlightenment, where it's, I take joy in your joy. Right. And so just imagine, you know, just take that on with your friends. Right? Every time a friend experiences a win or a success or something beautiful or sweet in their life, to just, you know, enter in and feel that genuine joy for them, not just because it impacts you or not. Right. Same thing with our partners or our children, right? To feel actual joy in compersion. Yeah.
Question: is that the opposite of jealousy?
Some people say it's the opposite of jealousy, and I would say maybe, but that doesn't mean you can't still have jealousy and compersion at the same time. They don't cross each other out. The same way, let's say you're moving to a new house. You might feel genuinely excited to be moving into the new place, and also genuinely sad that you're leaving the old. You can feel excitement and sadness about the same exact thing, right? So people can feel compersion. They're actually happy that their partner is going to have a fun time at a concert with someone else. And they could feel totally jealous because they wish they could go.
Jessica, could you define what jealousy is?
Yeah, it's a big loaded term and a big loaded concept. So, and you know, depending on our culture, I think jealousy sometimes is revered as like, if you're not jealous, then it's a sign you don't actually care, right? Or it's completely demonized, that like you're so jealous that you wound up killing someone in the name of your jealousy, right? So it has these real extreme, it's very polarized, right? Of jealousy being horrible and actually a sign of love, right? You know, jealousy, I think of it as coming from different things. Like I help people figure out, well, let's not demonize jealousy or run away from it. Let's see it as normal, and it's a sign that it's just trying to point to something important. And what it might be pointing to is it might have nothing actually to do with my partner and their partners. It might have everything to do with me and my insecurities and my own shame, right? Or my own fill in the blank, or triggers from my past around my own traumas that are coming up, right? Sometimes, though, it's not just your own insecurity. It absolutely is a relational. It's valid in that relationship. When your partner says they were going to do something and they don't, or your partner said they were going to do something for you and they don't, and they go do it for someone else, that's not you just being insecure. That's a relationship thing that has to be, discussed together, right? And then there's sort of envy, right? Which is like, oh, it's not that I want to take that away from you doing it with them, but I just want my version of that too. Right? I don't want you and her not to go to the concert. I just wish I had someone to go to a concert with as well. Right? And then finally, I think jealousy, it can really have these cultural, gendered, conditioned elements of possessiveness. That we own our partners, we're entitled to our partner's time, where we own or are entitled to their sexuality. And it can be very gendered around what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. And so those, narrative discourses really show up as forms of jealousy.
Yeah, that was really good, very nuanced. I like how you emphasize not pathologizing jealousy, because it does have a place. Absolutely. No, I think that was a very good, hopefully very useful discussion for everyone who's listening. Another one that I hadn't really heard about, and it helped me almost put words to things, is the concept of safe haven and secure base. So I thought those are quite vital to our emotional well-being. Would you mind elaborating on those as well?
Yeah. So safe haven is sort of exactly what it sounds like, right? It's that feeling, who is your safe haven, right? Who is it that you can turn to and they receive you, they see you, it's about acceptance, it's about comfort, right? It's about being able to let your guard down and being safe with this other person. And so that's an important aspect in our relationships. It doesn't have to just be romantic partnerships, our friendships as well, is that we feel that there is a sense of safety that we have to be ourselves and be accepted as we are. And then secure base is sort of, I can turn away from you, and it's because of our connection that I feel inspired to go be bigger or take risks in the world, right? To turn away and to this secure base that I know will be there for me to encourage me. So usually it's more like an encouragement relationship, someone that supports you, being bigger and more expressive in the world. And so, of course, it's lovely if we have that in one relationship, but we don't always have that in one relationship, right? We might have a friend or a partner or a parent that's more of that safe haven, that comfort, that soothing. And we might have someone else that's more of that, like, encouraging us to go further or to do or whatever it is.
Yeah. So you almost need somebody to encourage you, but also if you try something very ambitious and fail, you want somebody to be there as a safety blanket.
Right? I still love you, or you're still amazing, right? And keep trying, right? Yeah,
absolutely. I could see the chat has become quite busy. I think the discussion on jealousy sparked some more discussion among the listeners.
Great.
I can see Rosalind said, is jealousy fear of possible loss of something or someone as an object that's considered one's own?
Yeah, and that's what it's something in the book that I add to the jealousy discourse, is saying a lot of times what we call jealousy is actually attachment insecurity. And not that you're being insecure necessarily, but it could be very legitimate, that it's like a threat and fear of the loss of a loved one. Yeah, and that can be often what jealousy is showing up as.
Yeah. And then another comment from Zainab is, she thinks the jealousy is a feeling of inadequacy from the 8 principles of love. So I'm not familiar with the 8 principles of love. I don't know if you
Me neither, but I would say yes, at its root, right? there's a sense of I'm not enough. Yeah. And I find that when people start to feel more, they feel less inadequate, they feel more in their self-worth, and they understand what they have to contribute, right? They're more sort of centered in knowing they have value in their partnerships. They feel less jealous.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then last little comment, and then we'll move on. So Samuel has said that there's a little jealousy in everyone, I think. And it can be positive on the positive scale or the negative scale, all depends on how you see it and how it's used. So yeah, I think he's agreeing with what you've said.
Yeah, that's great. I agree. I mean, but it's so funny how many people I've also encountered that say they do not feel jealousy at all. Right? They don't feel it, they don't understand it. And when I have partners come to me and they're doing non-monogamy, and you have one that's like, I'm not jealous at all, I say, let's just wait. And inevitably it comes up down the road. It's really interesting. Yeah.
It's really amazing that you have actually gone through this journey yourself, because I understand you were married when you with a child when you first heard about polyamory, and you have actually invited your husband to take on this journey together. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
I think that's why it's so powerful. They really comes from someone who has done the work, and it can definitely send you down a spiral. And we will explore this a little bit. Now, when you talk about, we will jump into polyamory, but before, I just want to highlight the importance of conversation, because everything that you said in the book, it just highlighted that we just have to, not just, but we have to learn to really be able to communicate how we feel, what we think, and constantly examine these thoughts that we have daily, which I think is not done very well in monogamous relationships. And we take it for granted that, okay, now I'm married, I'm with this partner, and they're supposed to do what they're supposed to do without ever actually disclosing our feelings and thoughts. How important do you think communication is, and how little attention do we put on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's of course it's important. But the quality of that communication matters. I see a lot of people who get caught in this over processing, and they're not communicating very well. They're just over communicating, so being able to communicate in a more centered, grounded way, and being able to articulate our truths, our feelings, our needs, right? And then being able to really hear that from the other, right? And to not make assumptions and jump to negative conclusions about what the other person is saying, right? So absolutely. I mean, what relationship doesn't need that, from personal to professional, right? But obviously intimate relationships definitely need it to be up to date, to feel healthy, to feel fulfilling.
And I wonder, what do you think is driving the over communicating? Is it a vicious cycle I'm sensing, or what's your take on it?
Yeah, a lot of times it's people more in the preoccupied attachment style, right? That like you're using communication to keep someone in front of you, because I don't want to feel the separation of us, right? Because there's a lot of times where the best thing you should do is take a break, right? You're too activated. Your nervous system is in sympathetic dominance right now. You're not going to have a good conversation. You need to cool off and take some space and come back, right? And people in the more preoccupied style don't want to let go, right? Because I don't want to feel separation or loss or the trigger of abandonment come up, right? So that's usually some of it. Or there can just be this way of talking that keeps hooking people back in. Yeah.
And if we don't have sorry.
No, you go.
I was thinking, if we don't have the communication skills as well, it might be that we're trying to communicate, but we can't communicate what we want to say. So we just keep trying, and it never meets that need.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be really painful on both ends. And, I think, again, all relationships need that communication, but in non-monogamy, really a necessity. It doesn't work when you're trying to navigate multiple relationship, multiple time schedules, agreements, safe sex agreements, all the different things that have to be talked about. Otherwise, it's a disaster. When those things are talked about, it can go really well, right? In monogamy, many couples do consciously communicate, but many couples can get away with not and still kind of, getting by.
Getting by, I think, is the key word there.
Yeah.
I think most of us just go through life busy and not really exploring what we eat, how we exercise, and especially how we communicate. I think it's just a lost art, definitely. That certainly through your book, I have learned a lot on how to use healthy communication and express emotion in words, which is a phenomenal experience when you get there. At least try. Now, let's move on to non-monogamy. In your book, you do an amazing job at describing the different types of relationships along the non-monogamy scale. There can be asexual and polyamorous or solo polyamory, relationship anarchy, fully intimate, emotional cheating, misconceptions about polyamory, and so on. There's just so much to hear about. So we would love to hear, where would you start with that?
Yeah, so non-monogamy is an umbrella term that sort of captures all the things that you just said. And there's the first important distinction is between consensual non-monogamy and non-consensual non-monogamy. So non-consensual non-monogamy is a wordy way of saying cheating, right? It's where someone in the picture is not consenting to there being other romance, emotional sharing, or sexual sharing in some way, right? Whereas consensual non-monogamy is saying everyone involved is in the know and consenting of there being romance, emotional, or sexuality. Right? And not necessarily all together, but that, your partner is having other partners or other experiences, or as a couple, you might be going and having those experiences together. So in terms of consensual non-monogamy, right, there's so many different ways you can do it. And I make a chart in the book that sort of has emotional exclusivity, right, from one end of how open emotionally we are to being in love or having romance with more than one person versus how closed we are to emotional exclusivity. And then sexual exclusivity, right? Multiple partners are not. And so you can kind of go anywhere on that chart, right? So monogamy is usually, traditionally, is you are sexually exclusive and usually more emotionally exclusive, right? That we can have emotional cheating or an emotional affair, right? Polyamory is that you're going to have more than one love, right? Not just sexual partner. Whereas something like open marriage might be a marriage that then has more sexual relationships outside of the marriage. Maybe they're not as love-based or romantic-based. People that are swingers would be couples that together go and have sexual play or experiences with other partners or couples, right? So there's many different ways to do it. You can ask about any other specific ones.
I would love to hear personally about emotional cheating, because I think due to this lack of communication that we have instilled in our culture almost, a lot of people do feel a lot of things. They do on a regular basis. It's impossible that all of a sudden they stop feeling things just because they got married.
Exactly.
Or do people stop feeling things? I don't think so. At least that's just my opinion. But if people are feeling those things and they're not sharing it, you mentioned cheating, but how do we define that? Yeah,
it's a good question, and people definitely define it in many different ways. What matters most is how the two people in that relationship define it, and probably talking about that before you as you're getting into that relationship. I mean, for some people, it feels like they want their partner to be their emotional primary, and you should be coming to me with your emotional world first, right? Some people, but that's great because you say, well, if I have a best friend and sometimes it feels more appropriate to share certain feelings, I can have privacy that I share some things with my friends. That's okay too, right? So those lines can get a little blurry. But when we're shifting into sharing things that we feel like we can't even share with our partner, and we're having like romantic expressions, right? It's actually, we're not physical, but it is moving into this romantic nature and element of the exchanges that we're having with somebody else. And we're even starting to feel more emotions outside of this original relationship than in it, right? Where our partner would actually be very hurt. And that's probably the key element, is finding out what expressions of emotion with someone else would feel like cheating, would feel really hurtful to you, right? Which is different than confiding in my best friend.
So it's almost cultural to me that people feel that they don't actually think they need to talk about it, because I don't really see this conversation happening on a regular basis or at all.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of assumptions. You know, that's the power of monogamy, or any sort of institutionalized practice, is just that there's a lot of expectations and assumptions that are invisible, yet really there. Yeah.
So how could we ask our partners about emotional levels or sexual levels? Because it's almost as if, well, as long as you don't have sex with somebody, I'm okay with that. I hear that quite often.
Yeah, exactly. But then you hear things like, oh, but you were like sexting with someone else, or you're watching pornography, or you're paying for women on the internet to do cam work. You know, what is the line? Okay, you technically weren't physical, but you've been exchanging sexual erotic energy with somebody else, right? So yeah, I think it's really getting clear on those things, right? What is even sexual? Is it penis and vagina, right? Is it clothes on, but you know, where our genitals are next to each other, right? Or we're touching each other. So even that in any relationship does need to just be explored of, what does sex mean to you? What is emotional connection valuable to you? What feels like emotional connection, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you're in a monogamous relationship where a lot of things are assumed, you perhaps don't have these conversations as much as in a non-monogamous one.
Yeah, exactly. And that really is obvious when it comes to like STIs and STDs. You know, many people in monogamy don't even ask, or they say, have you been tested? And someone says yes, and then they don't even ask what the tests were. Right? Like, you know, so many times my monogamous girlfriends, I'm like, what are you doing? You're engaging in such risky behavior because of this sort of norm to not talk about it. Oh, he said he was tested. Did you see his results? Did you ask what he was tested for? When? If he's had partners since? You know, it's just like, whereas in the non-monogamy world, people are just really most people are very on top of those dialogues, right? And make it what probably is an uncomfortable conversation. They make it just more matter of fact.
Yeah, so it does seem to carry a lot of benefits. And I said earlier that one of my friends is in a polyamorous relationship, and I can just see how it's benefited her life. But I do wonder, generally there is a reluctance when people hear about polyamory. So do you think that's more nature or nurture? Where do you think that reluctance is coming from in the general public?
Yeah, I mean, the reluctance is, I think, deeply rooted. It's around, first of all, there's the assumption that non-monogamy is just sexual, right? And it's not. For many people, sex might be a big part of it. And for many people, it's not. It's really about having multiple loves, multiple emotional connections, having sort of what's called like polycules, like molecule of people, right? A polycule of having more support in your life, right? Having more people to pay the bills and take care of the kids, so to speak, right? So, and it can be even a political protest to sort of capitalism and the nuclear family, right? And patriarchal values. right? And colonialism, like people get really into all of that as well as seeing. So, you know, the reluctance can often though be about just still how much body shaming and sex shaming there is, right? That it's as if it's bad to want to have sex with somebody or more than one person. Why is that demonized, right? What's fascinating though is that it's not like people doing monogamy are actually being monogamous. When you look at the statistics, it's pretty bad, right? The statistics on cheating are significant, right? That people who admit to it, it's like might botch this up, so pardon me, but I think it's like up to 40% of women admit to cheating, and over 50% of men have admitted to cheating, and that's who have admitted, right? So you're like, wow, who's actually doing monogamy then? Right? We're just doing, you know, espoused monogamy, but not actual or practical monogamy. So yeah.
So Jessica, do you think everybody is polyamorous really?
I don't think everybody's polyamorous, and I definitely don't think polyamory is for everybody. I think what we need is just to feel that you get to choose what you actually want, right? Because yeah, I meet many people who genuinely just feel like, yeah, that whole polyamory thing is not for me at all, right? And then we have people who identify as asexual or aromantic, and that, so polyromance or polysexuality wouldn't be for them either, right? So I think we have to see it as a spectrum, you know, and people can land wherever they are on the spectrum. And that can also change throughout their life, depending on the phase that they're in, depending on the needs that they have. Yeah. So, but I think more people have non-monogamous urges than they allow themselves, right? Whether or not they act on it. Yeah.
But do you think then, based on this research that you just stated, and yes, if 50%, that definitely is much higher than that. Based on this research, are we more conditions due to our cultural background to actually enter straight into a monogamous relationship? And
yeah,
thinking anything outside of that, immediately we are punished. We punish ourselves maybe and limit ourselves to actually step outside of that thinking.
yeah, absolutely. For some people, it doesn't even occur to them as an option, or the consequences of that are too big, whether it's within the religious communities that they're in, the cultural expectations of getting married or not getting married, you know, all of that can be too much. So even if someone wanted it, the loss of their cultural, familial groups would be too much, right?
Gosh, I have so many questions to you, Jessica, as we have been started since 4 o'clock, but I could talk to you all day.
Yeah.
We would love to ask you about your hearts.
Yes, hearts.
How would you define it, and what does it mean?
Yeah, so this really came from me wanting to find, you know, to bridge and make this attachment theory more practical. Like, okay, great. How do we do it? How do you become more secure functioning in your relationship? And so I came up with the acronym HEARTS. So I'll just go through what the letters mean. So H is being here. It's about presence, right? The quality of attention and presence that you're bringing to your relationship. It's very hard to bond and attach when someone isn't there enough, right? So the importance of being present here. E is express delight. And that is something that really has been shown in the attachment literature, that it's not just the words of affirmation, love language. It's just this emanating that we have when we love someone, romantic or non-romantic, right? That just, I can look across the room at my son and I don't have to say anything. He knows that I have this I'm expressing delight in his aliveness and his beingness, right? And so often we find our value in what we do, in our doingness. And so express delight is that, you know, I love you for who you are. Not just what you do, not what you achieve, not for the needs you meet of me and how you make me feel better about myself, right? I love and who you are. And that doesn't have to be verbal. It's usually just this like oozing out of delight in your loved one. Then the A is attunement. And this is, really at the center for a reason, because the importance of tuning in to our partners and sort of stepping out of our own perspective to move into them. What's going on with you? And genuine curiosity, right? The tuning in, and sometimes it is more intuitive, sometimes it is more conscious and intentional, of that curiosity of, I want to know your interior world. I want to know what you're thinking. I want to know how you are. I want to know how things are going for you. It's most exemplified between a parent and a child. Before the child is even verbal, the parent who's attuned knows what they need, right? Through body language, through a shift in posture, through a facial expression, HEAR is rituals and routines. So this is a huge part of our attachment system, especially from like a neurological level, is like having reliability, having sort of the rituals and routines of daily life. And so that is from the like big and profound to the very mundane, right? So in our relationships, what are the routines that matter? What are the little routines of hello and goodbye, of comings and goings, of how we do morning, of how we do evening, of how we court each other, how we enter into sexuality, that matter, right? That help us feel connected together. And what are the bigger rituals? Ceremonial, right? Honoring changes, losses, sort of like upgrading or downgrading, or upshifting or downshifting transitions in relationships, right? So what are the rituals and routines you need? T is turning towards after conflict. And so if you look at the Gottman Love Lab and the Gottman Institute, John and Julie Gottman, they have done this amazing research just on the importance of conflict resolution. But it's not that we do it perfectly. It's just like how our attitude that we bring. So when there's conflict in partnership, which is inevitable, there always will be, how quickly are we able to turn towards each other and put aside our egos and put aside the desire to be right versus what do we need to do to be in relationship together? And then the S is secure attachment with self. And it's basically how you do the hearts to yourself, right? How do you heart yourself? And this was a big thing that I found. Some people had touched on it, but I feel like when we've come from an insecure history, whether that was in our childhood attachment relationships or our adult ones, right? Think of after people who have been divorced, let's say, and that's a huge attachment rupture as an adult, or a partner has died, refinding yourself is such a thing. So what are the ways that we need to have this secure attachment with self, being present with ourselves, having expressed delight? How do we attune to ourselves? What are the rituals and routines that keep us healthy, and in our wholeness? And what are the ways that we manage that inner critic voice, right? That would be the inner conflict resolution work. How do we manage shame and the inner critic? So that is a summation. And in the book, of course, I go through questions and more in depth into how to do these things and what you can explore.
Yeah, I think your book definitely has a lot more practical suggestions for each of those steps. So it's a useful book. I can't praise it enough, me and Linda. And I think it's a very good point that you make. We talk about monogamy, non-monogamy, but actually the relationship to self sometimes gets forgotten. So brilliant to see that heart encompasses that relationship to self as well.
Yeah.
Jessica, can I ask you, what is your current relationship status?
Yes. So I have right now it's like a 4-person adult, well, 5 adult, 4 adults and 1 child. And we joke that we finally at the right ratio of adult to child, right, for caretaking. So my first husband and I, we've been in and out. Well, we've been in relationship in some form for 20 years. And for 10 of those years, we were married. And then we still are life partners, and we still are co-parents, and we still live together in the same house. And he has a partner that's recently moved in with us. And then I also have a husband that we've been living with the last few years. Yeah, so that's our current constellation or polycule.
That's so beautiful, especially nowadays when children are really left alone in monogamous relationship. Unfortunately, two partners have to work to make money to actually pay for the child, and the expenses are through the roof. And very often the child is left alone. So it's beautiful to see so many adults taking care and teaching, as they say, it takes a village to teach a kid. And can I ask you, once you transitioned from your monogamous relationship many, many years ago to now, how has it enriched or changed your life?
Yeah, in so many ways. I feel like all of my relationships up leveled. I also had a lot of loss, but that's a whole other part of it, right? But yeah, I think the quality of my relationships got better. Because there's so many conversations that people bring to the table up front to sort through and vet some of the things we were talking about. I wasn't getting in as many relationships that weren't a good fit, and you figure that out 9 months or 9 years later, right? So there's just been a lot of love, a lot of support, a lot of lessons, and not all of those relationships were meant to last forever, right? Some of them were temporary, but they still were wonderful. Yeah. And
one last question about love. Why do you think people are so scared to love more?
Yeah. I think it's so funny because we're so drawn to love, and so much of the focus of television and movies and music is all about love. But I think we're afraid to love because we're afraid to lose. I think we're afraid of the pain of loss and the loss of that love, and being lonely and being with ourselves. And so there can really be a holding back. And I think also shame is what gets in the way of really being able to love, that for many reasons, through our family, through our culture and society, we learn pretty early, don't really be all of who you are. Like, be a little sliver of who you are, and those parts need to go away and be exiled, right? And maybe like perfect those over here. And so we develop all this shame for just who we are, what we look like, or what we're, what our being is. And then we want to conceal and hide that. And that keeps us from really opening up into love, when we think, well, if I truly show myself, then no one will actually love me.
The fear of having less love actually prevents us from having
fun. Or the fear of rejection, right? That, oh, if I show you and then I'm rejected, that's pretty painful.
Yes. And so before we go off to our second half, our cozy, non-recorded group chat, could we ask you 3 actionable and practical takeaways, or maybe 6 if you have that many?
Right. So I would
that our listeners maybe can practice immediately with their loved ones to have more love and more abundance.
Things that you can do. Well, if it's that, to have more love and abundance, I would definitely recommend going through the hearts, right? But I would say with yourself and your partner, figure out what your attachment style is, and in a fun, curious, interested way, not as a pathologizing way, right? But as like, oh yeah, okay, you tend to lean in real strong and I tend to lean back, or vice versa. So learn about your attachment. There's tons of fun quizzes you can take online. Or if you read my book, you can identify, so learn about your attachment, and then really work on, what do I need? What do I need to heal this attachment? So do your, whether it's your past trauma healing or history healing, right? And coming to yourself, as more of a secure, functioning adult, right? And then dialoguing with your partners of, what do you need from me to feel more safe and secure, right? Or more supported and encouraged. So even just those 2 concepts of the safe haven and the secure base, right? How can I be more of a safe haven and secure base for you? And what do you need to be more of a safe haven and secure base for me?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Can't wait for more of your work. Could you tell us what delights are waiting us from your
Yes,
work?
yes. So the Polysecure workbook is in the works for this year. And then I'm working on the next book, which is Polywise, which sort of goes hand in hand. So it was actually before Polysecure, I came up with a talk that really looked at, I think it's about 6 bullet points of here's the challenges people have in the opening up process. And the insecure attachment one was just one of those. So this next book is the other ones. Here are the other challenges. And a lot of it, similar to Polysecure, can relate to people even in a monogamous marriage, right? Like one of the challenges is that people are usually codependent and enmeshed. And how do you do this whole differentiation process, which is really hard on relationships? Yeah. So hopefully that one will be coming out the beginning of 2023.
That's really exciting. Can't wait to read it and to share it with our patients. And I just can't stress it enough that this book is not only for polyamorous people. It really is translating all of the relationship issues that we have with ourselves to start with, and our environment and those that we love. So anybody who wants to figure out relationship problems, then you've got to buy the book. Honestly, the best investment that you could ever do to yourself and your loved ones. Jessica, is there a website where you would like, or social media where you would like our listeners to join you?
Yeah, my website is jessicafern.com. And if you just sign up for my newsletter, I don't send things out very often, but the few times a year that I do, you'll be updated if a new book's coming out, or if I have a free talk, or a podcast, things like that. Yeah.
And also you have excellent workshops that I have done that is completely free of charge on your website. So
yeah, some free webinars on the website. Yeah.
They're very great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
We will just, if you guys want to join the free membership that we have on Afternoon Tea with docs.com, you can join the community where we can continue this conversation and to talk about lifestyle changes that you can do right away that can help you prevent, manage, and even reverse chronic diseases in a supportive community setting. You can follow us on Afternoon Tea handle on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as well. If you're on YouTube, do comment, share, and let us know what you're thinking and how we can help you better to improve your health. So thank you very much for joining us. And now we're going off camera so that we can have a little chat with Jessica. Thank you.